So Buzz, welcome to the Unmaking. Where are we parked right now? What are we looking at for our audio only listeners, and what's the significance of this place to you?
We're parked near Lake Hawea. We're looking north to the mountains around the lake, so Corner Peak, sort of really dramatic, jagged, brown, central Otago landscape. We bought this bit of dirt about 5 years ago, built a house on it 3 years ago, and that was just a project with my wife and I and the last of our kids that were still around, but it was my wife and I's project. And just wanted to create a space that sort of suited us and had our character. Building a house and landscaping is a really creative journey, and so it's been a really fun challenge. We've sort of built a energy efficient home and thought hard about, got solar and used a lot of passive house principles in the construction of the house, so techniques that conserve energy and make the living environment comfortable. We didn't go fully passive, but we went a long way down the passive road. And we've just been chipping away at sort of landscaping areas, when we have time and cash and stuff like that. So it's been a very cool journey. Really love this. Really love the location. Really love the house. Yeah, really enjoy it. Spend a lot of time here, so I need to enjoy it. Yeah.
Take me back to the beginning of your working life. You had a fresh Bachelor of Arts from Canterbury University, and then you entered the film industry, I think. So how did that start? What was that job actually about? And what did you learn?
I didn't know. Well, my old man was in the army. He was a professional soldier, and I kind of always thought I wanted to go in the army. Basically, I was quite a dyslexic guy, as a lot of people in creative industries are. Excuse me. And so I didn't quite know what I was going to do, but I sort of started thinking, actually, I'm not sure I want to go in the army because I don't know if killing people is entirely ethical as a 17-year-old. So I sort of told my parents friends, I was going to do a law degree. Seemed to get a good response, so I enrolled in law.
From your parents?
Yeah, from everybody. But then when I started doing law, being dyslexic, someone who can't really read or write particularly well, that was a bad mistake. So I managed to sort of pull out an E out of the hat for that one. But I'd sort of passed all my other papers, so I just decided to do a BA and pick the most interesting papers I could find at university. So I ended up with a degree sort of in American Studies and Political Science. That was a dual major. Which is great. American studies is really cool. American literature, American film, American history, American politics, kind of relevant in these times. But, I think that I sort of wanted a life where I had adventure. I did creative stuff, so I worked with pictures. I was in the outdoors. So the film industry, I didn't know anything about it. No, had no experience whatsoever. But, that seemed like it took the things I wanted was adventure, and so I went off to Australia. I sort of crewed on a 50-foot ketch for a while, sailed around the Kimberleys, then went to London, ended up in Wardour Street, which is a really famous film production street in Soho in London, working for an outfit called the Moving Picture Company. And I was a runner, and you end up delivering magnetic tapes around town. When I was sort of delivering magnetic tapes one day, bumped into this Irish receptionist, this girl, and she said they're starting up a music television station. And it was before MTV had got to Europe, so they'd just launched satellite broadcasting in England. So they had 5 channels, and it was Richard Branson's business partner that decided to set up a music television station. So he sort of picked out the best of the music journalism industry and created a staff of about 100. So I sort of got in there and I went and met the sort of the editorial director, and said I was keen. And she says, well, all the places are gone, but we do have one position left for a scooter courier delivering tapes. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. But fortunately, they hadn't done the interviews, so I went through the interview process for each show, and I ended up on the night show, which is a great show, and the presenter was Slugs from Madness. Have you ever heard of the band Madness?
Yes,
Yeah,
yep.
One Step
Yep.
Beyond, that sort of ska.
Yep.
So he was the sort of presenter, and so I worked in that show, and that was fantastic. You know, he was a really charismatic, great guy. He used to rock in at about 2 in the afternoon. The show, we'd begin filming the show at about sort of 6 at night, and he'd sort of dictate a script and just wing it. And I mean, he probably won't appreciate me telling that story, but he was actually a fantastic gentleman, a really good guy. So I worked there, became floor manager, really enjoyed that. It was sort of, I describe it as a sort of B-grade celebrities of the music industry. Lots of lots of live performances of Sun Ra, the sort of alternative jazz musician, Hugh Masekela, and Iggy Pop, and the guy from Primal Scene. All these guys just came through and did performances, and Boy George had a show there, and his show focused on the sort of risky, sort of the, not underworld as in crime, but the sort of fetish world and all that sort of world of London. And yeah, it was very good. I became good friends with a cameraman who was a Pakistani dude called Icky, and he used to get me along to a lot of heavy dub, kind of underground dub gigs where these kind of Jamaican dudes would have big sound systems, and sort of illegal buildings and massive bass sessions and all that sort of stuff, which is sort of the world you want to experience when you go to London. So that was fun. And then I went and visited a production company in West London that made wildlife films, and sort of said I wanted to get involved with wildlife film production. And they said, well, as it goes, we've got a cameraman and producer from Botswana in London editing a film. Go and meet him. So went to Africa for a year, filmed in the Okavango Delta, came back, got a job with Italian television, Rai Duo, working in their arts department. And then I'd been away for about 5 years, so I decided, being super patriotic about New Zealand, I needed to get back to New Zealand. So I came back to New Zealand, worked on probably New Zealand's first fishing show that sort of toured all over New Zealand. And eventually I ended up doing some time in the lighting department because I wanted to learn about cinematography and proper lighting for drama. So I worked under a gaffer called Grant McKinnon, who's a cinematographer now, who's pretty well known. Did some feature films and bits and pieces, and for about 4 or 5 years, and then shot a lot of documentaries, music videos, and then eventually kind of ended up doing a lot of my own projects all the way, self-funded snowboarding films and lots of shooting on film, and just any spare cash you had, putting it into your own projects. And then I sort of ended up eventually, sort of towards the end of the film career, just doing a lot of what they call corporate videos, but which I actually quite enjoyed. You're just working for businesses, telling their stories. And by that time the internet had arrived, and so I'd sort of done the arc.
Well, I was thinking about the parallels between perhaps the film industry and the military in terms of the hierarchical nature of it. And there is very, you start as the runner and you work your way up, don't you? You pick a department where you're going to be in department, which department is it going to be? And then you go through. Was there essentially you're still kind of realizing somebody else's vision, basically? So although it's very collaborative on set, almost everybody there is realizing somebody else's vision, including the director in some ways, depending on the project. What was the frustration involved with that?
I think that's a really good observation, actually. And just going back to your first observation, a producer described it as like military meets the circus, which is about right. Frustration. It's a really good call, because like everybody, you're always on the road to somewhere, or I think if you're creative, you want to be realizing your own vision. So on one hand, you've got to, I guess when I entered the scene, all the gear was expensive. Film was expensive. Everything was, edit suites were extremely expensive. So you couldn't just DIY it. Couldn't afford to, because so I had to work my way through departments, like as a runner, as a floor manager. I worked as a sound recordist, then a best boy, and been an assistant director and a producer director and cameraman, all that sort of stuff. So you just you got to pay the rent. But so what I found is that it's not particularly easy to chop between departments quickly, because it takes time to get established, get a reputation in that department. So there's 4 or 5 years and you've been in the department. But that's also really useful, because you learn the first 90% really quickly, and then I think you learn the last valuable 10% over a much longer time. You know what I mean? It's those little things that are valuable. So yeah, I reckon frustration for me, for sure. I was always wanted to do it all in every genre. That's impossible. I wanted to do feature films, I wanted to do wildlife films, and you sort of have to specialise. So slightly a headless chicken in that regard.
Is there a piece of work that you're most proud of looking back, where you say, hey, we really nailed that, and it was like, yeah, it still holds up? Yeah, I mean, I reflect on what I did, and I reckon I was probably more motivated by the process and my personal life experience than I was about the story, which is actually fundamentally pretty flawed if you're going to be, because filmmaking, everyone will always say, is story is king. It doesn't matter. Everything serves a story, and for a film to be good, it's got to be a really brilliant story. But I was less enamored with story. I was more interested in the life experiences, the remote locations, the crazy people. That's what fed me. But if there was one project I would be reasonably proud, I mean, I'm really proud of lots of experiences, but one product, I guess, I made a film as a sort of cameraman called Tuna Cowboys, and it was for National Geographic America, produced in conjunction with Natural History New Zealand. And the producer and writer was a guy called Mike Barner, who I'm sure a lot of people in New Zealand will know. But Mike Barner, it was his baby and his vision, so he takes the lion's share of the credit. I was the sort of main cameraman, but very briefly what that was about was, it was a 1-hour documentary on the southern bluefin harvest in the Southern Ocean off the south of Australia, a place called Port Lincoln. So the tuna fishery typically had a season where they could catch bluefin tuna, and then I think the Japanese, they sell it to Japanese, and Japanese sushi market would get flooded. So there's a guy down there called Denko who we based our film on, and he was a Croatian immigrant who when we filmed, he was a multi-millionaire because he had pioneered this way of capturing these tuna, bringing them into pens in inland waters, feeding them and drip feeding the market to keep prices high. The artificial scarcity in terms of like the...
So instead of a season, flood, low price, he would get his quota, bring back juvenile tuna. Juvenile tuna is still big, still half a man's body sort of size and bigger, and then keep them in the pens, and then throughout the whole year sell the tuna. So he would maintain prices, or that fishery would maintain so they keep the prices a bit higher. So our documentary is about filming the harvest, which was 8 weeks at sea, on a fishing boat. Yeah, and it was a challenge living with a couple of rough-ass fishermen. But the whole drama of it was that they very briefly is that they have a mothership, 120-foot ship, tows 2 pens, which are these 50-metre PVC rings, 2 of them bolted together with a 30-metre net that drops with big weights into the ocean. So it's like towing a cylinder net. They have a spotter plane that goes up, and it's a long-distance spotter plane, and it'll spot a school of these tuna, radio down, and then a chum boat, fast boat, goes out with a cubic metre frozen block of pilchards on the back, and these guys chuck the pilchards. They keep the tuna at the service. Then a purseine boat, a slightly bigger vessel, comes, circles the school, draws in the wire at the bottom of the purseine means purse, so draws in the purse string, captures the school. Then the lumbering mothership that's doing about 1 knot comes in with these massive pens. Then the divers link the purseine net with the holding pens. They have a camera, they corral the fish in, they do a rough count of their quota. They eventually get their quota, say over 2 weeks, and then they've got to tow this quota back to the mainland. And the major part of the film was that a lot of sharks, big oceanic sharks, chew into the nets to get the dead tuna. And so each day the divers have to go down on lines, get the sharks out, and sew up the nets. And so, you know, they can be diving to a depth of 25 meters, I think it was, or whatever, you're up to the edgy of diving. And then, you know, you eventually go past where a place called Neptune Island, which is the greatest, you know, sort of, or one of the best great white shark places. And it was the first time cameras had been allowed in and blah, blah, blah. But, yeah.
What was your role on that?
I was the sort of main cameraman, really.
Yep.
I shot everything from a metre below the water to the top of the mast. They had a specialist underwater cameraman there because that was mainly Mike Barner, who was the producer and director of it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's on YouTube. Tuna Cowboys, it's called. Yeah, it was good. It was a mental challenge, you know, being on a boat. Like the Denko, he was this rough Croatian with, you know, I was filming his hands and he'd see I was filming his hand and he'd go, yes, I know, Tony, they're whoppers, aren't they? You know, and he talked about his exploits with the ladies of the night in Adelaide, how they all knew Denko, and, you know, but he was a cool guy. He was, like, I got up one night in the middle of the night and I could hear this kind of noise, because he'd bought this 120-foot ship. We'd taken off. It didn't have an engineer or anything. It was 3 professional divers, his wife, who was a kind of Thai lady, and him. You know, one night I hear this noise. I go down at about 2 a.m, find out what's going on, and he's sort of down the back of the boat with a acetylene torch, cutting a hole in the back of this 120-foot ex-Taiwanese fishing trawler because there was a cable running on it. You know, he's just cutting a big chunk off it.
That sounds pretty Croatian. I've worked with a few Croatians in my time in Europe, and they would get shit done people. They were like really super motivated, hardworking.
He was hardworking.
Yeah, not afraid of cutting a corner if necessary.
He cut sugar cane to buy his first boat. No, but he was a good man. He was solid and knew about the ocean.
There comes a time, I think, in the film industry. I'm not sure if that's internationally, but certainly I think in New Zealand, where your experience actually starts to count against you. I've sort of heard it referred to as aging out, which I think is a very honourable way of putting it. I think in some ways it's an industry that eats its old. So how did that point come for you? Did you see that coming? Was it a kind of bit of a blindside?
Yeah, I think that's a fair call. I never have any resentment about that because I just think it's just natural attrition or law of the jungle or nature. It's a young person industry, and young people are attracted to working with young people, and it is an industry. You know, you do a lot of work for free, you do a lot of work for the love of it. So I think I probably felt I became a little bit undirectable, got a bit old. You know, there's a joke in the film industry, you know, old cameramen, you know, old, slow and expensive. I mean, so what's attractive about employing them when you get some guy that's really good, techie, young, fast, energetic.
Until shit starts to go really wrong, and that's when you want the old dude.
I do agree with that. And I mean, actually, it's, you know, one observation I think about New Zealand is it is tough. You know, everybody knows in the creative industries are hard. You know, everyone knows that. It's a cliche, isn't it? Because financial insecurity and. But I would say that I've seen a lot of really good cameramen, older guys, not getting work. And I think if they'd been in America or another country, they'd have plenty of work because shooting some of those big dramas, just having knowledge about all the big lighting trucks and stuff, it is timed around the block. And I've found it, I feel, sorry for them. I'm a bit condescending because that's not what I mean, but I feel frustrated for a lot of people that I just think are highly talented, but there's just not enough work to go around. And just another little anecdote is the same with the music industry. Some incredibly talented musicians, but that deserve to be a lot more secure. Here's an example. Was in Dunedin. Went to an old pub called the Arch because the Clean were playing. David Kilgour wasn't the Clean. It was David Kilgour and the Heavy Eights. There was about 6 people in the pub. 4 of those people were looking in a different direction, and David Kilgour had about 5 guitars. Played with his band. I think they were just using it as a practice session. But the music coming out of that band could have entertained a stadium of people. He was talented musician. I just looked around. I thought, this is New Zealand. The poor guy. Well, I don't know if he cared, but I just thought it was a bit wrong that someone with so much talent just was playing to an empty space at his stage in his career. And one other quick anecdote. Another musician, I remember seeing the guy Buzz from, I can't remember the name of they're a really celebrated New Zealand band, but extremely talented musician, but he's a tiler, and he was just doing tiling on K Road outside a nightclub, just sort of sitting on the ground. He kind of looked like some beggar or pauper, just chipping tiles out, and it was hard work. And I just thought, I know you're a man with insane amount of talent, and not to say tiling's bad, I'd happily be a tiler, but the scene looked like this guy just chipping stuff on the pavement in Cray Road, and I just thought that's sort of the crime of, almost the tragedy of what awaits creative people in New Zealand sometimes. They're just internationally talented, but it's just not the population or whatever it is here.
Yeah, any other market or bigger market, that person's got a full McMansion and what have you.
Yeah,
and that all they're doing is their music. They're not having to do even like side gigs or side hustles with music.
Yeah,
they're just performing their own music and making a great living out of it.
And that's a nice way to identify that they would have so much more time to realise their music.
Yeah. I see that to be able to have that market access to get people up internationally. When did you know it was time then to start looking elsewhere outside the industry for a plan B? What was was there a specific moment, or did that just sort of evolve?
Yeah, I mean it's a very alluring industry. Film industry, because it's exciting. You meet interesting people, you see interesting stuff. But I think there's many creative lives you have, and if I didn't, I think what was happening to me a bit is that I was probably a bit of a journeyman cameraman in that I could create a pretty picture, but I wasn't really doing very meaningful content. All I was doing is there was, because I was working in, I guess, corporate videos, there's no ability to do light and shadow. It all just had to be shine light, if you know what I mean.
Yep. Not a lot of depth of field either, I'm guessing. It was just basically everything's in focus. And
everything's got to look pretty. Everyone's got to be happy. All the images, the messages are always going to be positive, which is cool because you know where you stand. So, look, we're living in a place called Muriwai Beach, west of Auckland. Lots of artists there, film industry people. Really liked it, but the kids were kind of having to go to high school on the North Shore, and I wasn't entirely comfortable with it. I knew they'd be burning around in cars to go to parties and stuff around the North Shore, and and there's some dangerous roads. Also, I whakapapa to the South Island, like a lot of family, 200 odd, 1860s and West Coast and Canterbury area, so got deep roots. So I went to boarding school actually in Christchurch, and university. So I sort of had a lot of it in my blood. So I felt like I wanted to get my son and my daughter down here. And I also had like a kind of a health kind of blip, which I won't go heavily into, but that was a circuit breaker because I took some time off work. So which was great because I just like a dog with your teeth into something, you just don't let go. And then if you get a circuit breaker, you can let go. So, and my wife, she's fully into trying new stuff, going on an adventure. She doesn't take much encouragement. So we just decided to come down here and shake it up, and it's been really good actually. I think the South is. A good friend of mine described it as a bit white bread, which is fair. Take that how you will, but Wanaka in this area, it's got a lot of very cool things about it. So happy with the move, and in terms back to your question, I just think there's I'd love to be a portrait painter, I'd love to be a sculptor, I'd love to be so many things, but it all just takes so long that you just got to peg your hat on one thing and give it a nudge.
No, do all the things. Do all the things, Buzz. So you converted your garage into a studio then during COVID. Walk me through what that looked like. What was in there beforehand, and what was the plan during that process? What did you pull out? What did you put in? And what was the first thing you actually made then once you were in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I sort of I sold a bunch of film gear, and I bought like a CNC machine because that was it's sort of the maker movement had kicked off, and you could get a bit of software and have a low-level CNC machine. I bought a lathe, bought a bunch of stuff. I just sort of thought, right, I'm going to make lighting because I quite enjoy lighting. It's a bit sculptural. It can be really artistic, and it can be a little business because you've always got to pay the rent and stuff. So I made this these wooden lights out of pine that sort of had glued together sort of rings, and then within those rings they had rings of plexiglass which sort of radiated light, and people responded well, and it's the classic thing is your friends and family buy your first stuff, which they did, like a lawyer mate up in Auckland who's I knew from uni, he put a few in his house, which was really affirming. As he said, I wouldn't buy them if I didn't like them, without a smile. So being a lawyer, he went straight for the jugular. He's quite honest. So and then I would say from there, I've just been trying to find where I sit, and will that ever stop?
I think founding something at our age takes a certain type of courage or something. What did it feel like at the time? Did it feel like courage? And with hindsight, do you look back and say, well, that was courageous, or it was stupid or risky? Or how do you frame it now?
Yeah, probably more on the stupid camp than the courageous camp. I think having a supportive wife helps a truckload. Yeah, because I do feel sick every time I shell out a bunch of cash for a piece of gear. That it's all fun, isn't it? The dream, or I'll just buy this because it'll make me much better at that.
Be more productive.
Yeah.
It can do more.
It was the same in the film industry. If I only got that camera, I'll be a better cameraman. And I reckon that's an illness. Quick anecdote which I think is useful, is I worked on a music video featuring Shayna Lang, and the director of photography was a guy called Leon Nabi, who has shot Whale Rider. He's very well respected. He's sort of the artist's DOP. And I was the sort of best boy, and I was working with Grant McKinnon, the gaffer. But his sort of comment, we had a really small budget and just a little wee van with a bunch of lights on it. But Grant's observation about Leon Nabi, he was never negative about the gear he had. It was always a sort of a creative challenge, always was going to make something interesting out of what he had, and that's the New Zealand number 8 Y mentality. But it was just a positivity about creativity with just what you've got. So I think that's an important mindset. You can always say, I can't do this because I haven't got that, and that's what I've found working in Wanaka, is that I've made lights. Then after COVID, suppliers have really reduced down the materials that they carry. So I've spent all this time developing a light, and suddenly I can't get the materials I need to make it. So that sort of reminded me that you've got to be positive and creative with what you've got. And that's, that's the philosophy. There's a universe inside a ping pong ball. There's a world of entertainment inside a very small amount of either stimulus or materials or equipment.
Yeah, I learnt the acronym GAS, Gear Acquisition Syndrome, which I hadn't heard before until a few years ago when I realised, holy shit, I've really collected quite a few lenses here. I'm not really using them all. It's a lot of fun to buy them, but it's like, and I fully agree, and to understand that, working with constraints, and if you've only got a 50mm lens or a 35 or whatever, then you have to walk a bit more, and be a little bit more creative to work around those constraints. Do you find you have phases with that sort of thing in terms of that? Because I also see it's almost in a similar category as retail therapy. It can feel very good, satisfying, and if you can afford it, to sort of get some of those little things and tools, but really if you're actually moving the needle or not.
How do you mean? I sort of lost you on moving the needle. Yeah.
In terms of the equipment that you're purchasing, whether it actually makes you then more productive or not, or whether it actually is fulfilling a different role in your life.
I generally think that I do use it. I mean, I reckon my fail rate on purchases is probably about 10%. I reckon everything, because it is expensive. I think about it really hard, and I generally have got something I want to make with it. So, I mean, one stroke like I had was that I won a competition with Xero, which gave me a whole bunch of cash, which enabled me to buy things like laser cutters and all sorts of stuff. And so I buy a laser cutter, and it was quite a capital outlay relative, but it kind of used it a bit, and then it sat there for 3 months or 6 months, and the wife's a bit like, well, why'd you buy that sort of thing? But no, I'm back using it now, and it's perfect for what the next slide I'm making. So I think a little bit with what I'm doing, I just had this feeling like I wanted to go and paint pictures recently, because that would be simple. I remember one time, like, I was working with this guy who was a musician, a dude called Nick Sampson, who was in the Netherworld Dancing Toys, and he came along directing a corporate video, and I was like the cameraman, and we were carrying a gear in and out, and he said, oh, this is just like being in a band, loading all the gear in and out. And I sort of said, I don't really think it is. Well, that bit is, but I don't actually think it's like being in a band, because it's quite buttoned down, the film industry, whereas the music industry, it's just emotion pouring out to people. So that's where I felt like the painting might be a bit more pure creativity coming out, more in a more satisfying way, because you're getting the stimulus of creating colours and seeing how colours go together, and that might be much more rewarding, because I find with the road that I've gone down with lighting is a bit like the film industry. Lots of bits of equipment, lots of fiddling around, lots of sort of dreaming of stuff, and and then you eventually come out with a product that's quite nice, but it sort of feels like there's a lot of faffing in between the pure creative sort of outflow. Now that might be my own limitation speaking, because I'm sure there's a lot of actors and directors that are more on that, bad choice of word, but flow state. I'm sure, you know what I mean? I'm sure there's, so maybe that's just a personality glitch more than a...
Well, I think, some people have an affinity for tech, and objects. I mean, you look at something like road cycling as a sport, road cyclists like tech, and it's all about getting the lightest componentry, and you can always make your bike lighter and things like that. And sometimes I think from a creative perspective, sometimes we're acquiring objects or tools or things without really knowing what we're going to do with them, but we've kind of got a feeling this is going to come in handy at some point later on, and then a few years down the track, oh, actually this is it, and now and suddenly you are using it, and this is exactly the thing that you'd needed, that perhaps then at that point you couldn't afford, but you did buy it a few years ago and you've got it, and you can use it.
Well, I think that we've talked in the past about the need to have a business component to your creativity, because I was always thought in the film industry, if it wasn't commercially kind of viable, which is, sort of sounds pretty cliche word, but you didn't get to create unless your last project had some sort of financial kind of validity about it. You didn't get the next one, so your creativity stopped, so you sort of had to work out that financial bit. And that's where I think with my lighting at the moment, I sort of was half been thinking about doing stuff that was, am I a factory or am I an artist? And I've actually swinging back to I want to be an artist, because I think the fun of it is the problem solving and the creating. I don't think the fun of it is the repetition and the selling,
That's interesting, because I think I've seen you describe your work as like you have a creative itch, but then you've also been scratching away for well over 30 years, and that itch is still there.
Creative
do you know where it comes from? What you can put that down to?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because so many people are creative, aren't they? I mean, I'm always amazed by how many New Zealanders are quite creative, and I kind of thought that when social media came along and I saw all my friends who weren't considered creatives pick up their phones and have really interesting eyes, known by an eye as, an angle on stuff. So I think everybody's quite creative. But the creative urge, I was thinking about that, because I thought we're going to talk. What are we going to talk about? And I thought about what compels you to do creative stuff, and it's got to be a strong compulsion, because it's not always pleasant, is it? Because there's times where I've been unemployed and I've worried about money and blah blah blah.
I think there's a difference between there are people that can be creative or perhaps have creativity but. And then there is the compulsives, that basically you have to do. Similar to stand-up comedy, I think there are people that say, I could get up there and tell a joke. But that's quite different to the really hardcore comedians that is their thing. They just have to be up there doing it.
I think that compulsion is it. And, I guess for me, if I, when I was a cameraman, I'd see a pretty scene and I'd be really motivated. I'd just be really motivated by that composition or the light or the colours, and it's the same now. I'm really motivated by colour and combining colours, and I just really driven, and always have been since I was a little kid. I mean, I was crap at everything else except for sort of average at drawing, you know what I mean?
You're making physical objects now, so things that actually sit in somebody's house. After so long making something that actually kind of disappeared, once the credits rolled in some ways.
Yeah.
What does that feel like, that to be making something that's more permanent and tangible like that?
Yeah, I like that, because that's one thing I sort of was a little bit down about in the visual screen production industry is a good catch-all term for it. But I was a bit down on it because you pour all this money, energy, time, passion, anxiety into your product, and it'd be, and it'd be lost in digital ethersphere, if that's such a word, gone. Or it would be, I'd make something and I wouldn't think it's very good compared to everyone else's work, which was great. You know what I mean? I just think that my stuff was just amateur hour, you know what I mean? But yeah, to your point, where's it going to be seen, if at all? Whereas with something like a light, I sort of like the concept that it's in somebody's house, they've invited it into their house, they like it, people come and enjoy it, they might comment on it, it performs, it lights up, it has emotion, it has a daytime way it looks, and then it has a nighttime morphs into something, and I'm interested in that idea that, it is a piece of art. I want to push I think that's where I need to go a bit more, is, making the object art, because people, a lot of lights are beautiful, chandeliers are art and stuff, but if you think about artworks, I don't think a pen and light, art is political, can be political, but art always, I think, triggers emotion. If somebody has an emotional engagement or reaction to, I think that's part of what's the difference between craft and art, because there's craft objects, or you're good at your craft, or there's a high level craft in your art, but then there's art. So is the is the difference between art and craft emotion, greater emotional politics. But then you think about, an artist is saying something, or making you think about something, or making you questioning something. But then can a light, I don't know if a light can do that. I don't know if you can get politics into a light, but you can get emotion into a light. So I think it can take a big step towards being an artistic object. And if people say my wall is for a painting, but above my table it can only be a light bulb for seeing food, who says there's a line between those two spaces?
What's in the lead then? So when you're designing, are you designing for when the light's on, for when the light's off, for the actual how it's going to fill the space?
It's an interesting one, because I think you got parameters of weight, you got parameters of size. You're trying to work out what space it might fit in. So you got and then you got, it's got to perform some function or not. So you got those parameters, and then you got to work within that. And then I think it's got to look pretty during the day, but then it's got to do something interesting at night, because actually one thing is that when a light goes on an object, it really lights up all its imperfections. So you got to have something that structurally works, but then there's a bulb inside it revealing to the world in really bright detail how your structure works, and that can be sometimes a little shonky. So you've got to actually get the mechanics all kind of clever. So there's so it's inside and outside and 360 degrees. So it's more challenging than I thought it was going to be, actually.
How do you deal with the dead ends? So if you, or dead ends, or the failures, or the things where you think something's going to work, perhaps, or you've had an idea and that you've gone down this route, and then you realise, it's going to look good, or it looked good when it was off, but now I've turned it on, and exactly as you say, suddenly, oh God, it doesn't work once it's illuminated.
Yeah, for sure. I see imperfections in everything that I've done. I went to an exhibition at the Auckland Art Gallery, which was sort of like I can't remember what it was called, but it was just like a retrospective of Maori art. And so it was really good to go for. I don't go to a lot of, I'd like to go to a lot more, I don't go to a lot, but it was really good to go to, because I sort of went to this exhibition which had the best of New Zealand Maori art, all the big names, and some of the works felt kind of a little bit rough in technique, or the craft wasn't that great, but they were still very powerful, effective works, you know what I mean? So I took a lot of heart or sort of inspiration from that exhibition, because I could see that you don't have to be perfect in your technique to still create an object or a picture that works really well, is really powerful, is really emotive. So I mean, but then that potentially can be used in my own mind as a sort of a cop out. That's a bit of a fail there, but it's just part of the artwork, Embrace the roughness.
The hand of man, or
yeah.
Yes, yep.
So, in answer to your question, fails, lots of iterations, I think, before it's finished. So, and that's always a bit stressful, because you're wasting materials and time, So you kind of, like, you might have an expensive timber, or it costs a lot to freight stuff down here, and you can mock it up with cheap stuff, but you have to go to the actual stuff you're doing it from, and then there's lots of errors and mistakes with that. There's sometimes you're asleep at the wheel, sometimes, it just doesn't behave in the way you think, or you don't understand your tools deeply enough, and so you just have to redo it until you get it right.
So do you start with planning, or do you just start making and see where it goes? What's your process?
My process. So I sort of, I look online a lot I reckon Instagram is really good. I follow a lot of artists, and then I get really inspired what artists are doing, and then I think, well, how can I apply some of the sort of either techniques or colours or effects that they've done how can I take that and rework it? So it's, in some instances, it's like a musician resampling music. And I think there's that saying that, I don't know, what is it? Good artists imitate great artists copy or something. I don't know if that's quite right. But so you get, I always thought, artists have been influenced by movements. There's been New Zealand artists that have been part of a movement. They've gone to Europe and they've been able to work with those artists. And they're sort of inspired by a line of design or a line of artwork. So yeah, I'll sort of look on Instagram, I'll see what's happening in the art world, I get inspired by stuff, and then I think about, well, what tools have I got and what materials have I got. So that there's a fence around it already. And then I'll have a couple of 4 or 5 lights that I'll be doing, and I'll just try and work out technique, trial and error of technique of how to make stuff, and see if, and then of course when you chuck all that into the blender, something quite different comes out, and then what comes out is your creation, I guess, is that blender of technique and trying to go somewhere and it ends up somewhere else. But there's always a sort of I really like that color, and I want to somehow incorporate that feel, but also thinking, okay, well, how's it going to look? At the moment, I'm just trying to focus on having a bulb in the middle and building something around that bulb. Just because there's a universe of creativity just in that concept. So not going with LED lights or not doing this or not doing that. It's just a bulb that someone can hang in the middle of an object, and then what I make is going to interact with that bulb. Yeah, and, I'll make stuff and I go, well, I've got to get much better at creating something that illuminates in an interesting way, because there's too much light's lost, or it's just so.
Are you comfortable with the term artist? Do you call yourself an artist? When other people call you an artist?
Yeah, I don't know, because because I sort of called myself an artist for a bit because I thought that was the right thing to do, and then I thought, well, you're not really an artist, because as I was explaining before, but what is an artist? I mean, and what does it matter? Yeah, happy to be an artist, creative, whatever. I don't care. Designer, it's all good. I think they're all good terms.
You've said you want your work to have a distinctively New Zealand feel. How do you do that, and what do you work on making sure that you include or that you address, and what are you consciously trying to keep out of the work?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think that you probably flip it on the head. I just think New Zealand permeates into you and comes out in your work. So I think the idea I was sort of talking about was I'd like to be part of a New Zealand design language. And there's lots of, and when I say that, I don't want to be like a guy fitting into a box that's supporting something that's already done. I want to do my own things. But I'd like to think that the works that I do are unique to New Zealand. That would be nice, because I'm proud of New Zealand. I think there's a lot of creative people here. There's New Zealand has its own energy, and I just think, I don't know why we can't be the sort of the Denmark of the South Pacific in terms of design and design export, and we probably already are, actually, in a funny sort of way. But it's that, if you want to get onto economics, we feel like we've got an economy that's a lot about sort of consumption of resources, whereas I just think they talk about value add. Our design sector is our value add sector. Why aren't we taking our timber and just doing fantastic kit set stuff, whatever? David Trubridge has done a great job of that sort of kit set lighting model. Much respect for what he's done and who he is.
Tremendous value add for in terms of that. So it's still small volumes compared to the quantity of logs that are being sent offshore. But in terms of, there's somebody that's taking native timber, as are you, adding significant value to it.
Yeah, and that's what we, if we could do more of that. They talk about productivity and stuff like that. I would have thought if somehow sort of politics, but some sort of governmental momentum to beef up our sort of design export stuff because at some point you've got to extract more value with less resources, and that would be a good way to head towards that idea, because you can't keep eating the planet, particularly beautiful New Zealand. But just back to that thing about New Zealandness, and it's like you and I live down here in central Otago, which is browns, beautiful browns, but then that colour permeates into your psyche. And then I look at stuff out of Europe, and it's Spain or somewhere, and it's poppy pastels, and and I love those colours. So I don't want to just be a guy that's going to do Totara and browns, although I love those colours. But I think a challenge is not to be a bit tunnel vision in your sort of creative palette by virtue of what you see around you all the time.
You've also started working with wool, I think, relatively recently.
Yeah.
What is it that drew you to that, and what are you making with wool?
Yeah, I have a terrible sort of I get pulled in two directions all the time. And I went to stay with a good mate in Christchurch recently, and he totally called me out because on one hand, I want to be really sustainable, not because it's trendy, but because I believe it's you got to look after your natural environment. It's really important. And so where we live on our property, we've got solar power. The water goes into a on-site septic tank. So if I'm going to use nasty chemicals, it's going to be in the groundwater. It'll eventually leach down to the bore that we drink from. So going to wool, I am very drawn to. I just wanted to find a material that was close by, so it didn't have carbon miles in transport. I wanted to try and support a local sector, and wool is well documented at having loads of really fantastic properties, fire retardant, and can act as a sound baffle that can be air filter, and it's biodegradable, all these fantastic things. So I found a local supplier, and I just wanted to come up with a product that used timber and wool and had low carbon miles as much as I can achieve. And so that's where that pendant came from. And I'm currently working on another wool pendant with a digital knitting company in the North Island. It's been a year in the gestation, and it'll probably be about another year, but working on that. So just to provide an option that is natural in this. But then in the same regards, I've just ordered a bunch of Spanish spray paint that's shipped around the world and is quite toxic, but I just love the colours. And so that was my mate in Christchurch. She was sort of saying, well, you got this big blurb on your thing, on your website, saying that you're motivated to be natural, yet sometimes the colours that you want or the materials you want are toxic, like plastics and stuff like that. So it's hard, you're torn. But I think as long as your product's going to last a long time, and you haven't got too much waste in the process, as long as you can make conscious steps where you can, I think that sort of helps.
I like your blurb. I like your sustainability blurb. And one of the things I really like about it is it's real. It's not pretending to be something that you can't live up to or what have you. You're very frank about that, and in terms of it's got a little bit of a hey, this is what we're about. You reference James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, which is connected to that. Hey, we're all interconnected. It's all you've got to watch where things are going, as you say for yourself, that this is it's going to be in your drinking water. So
which is, I like the fact that where I live is a microcosm of the world. It's my actions directly affect me, which is often most people's actions, they don't see the consequence, but when it's your home. And just really quickly, when I spent that year in Africa, I lived in a premium ecosystem that just had nothing but pure wildlife, no fences, nothing. It was one of the premium ecosystems called the Okavango Delta, and just seeing the day-to-day, the way an ecosystem operates with from the giraffes, the elephants, the lions, the cheetahs, the leopards, right through to the crocodiles, the lechwe and the hippopotamus and snakes, tarantulas, they were all packed in this place, and just that, the interconnectivity of that environment, how it ebbed and flowed, that changed me forever. So I would feel, and I love New Zealand, and as a lot of people do. So you are constantly racked with guilt about waste and toxicity of your process. I always feel guilty about it, but I still will use toxic stuff to try and make what I think is a beautiful object.
We talked before about musicians and market size and things like that. So in a bigger market, you could probably just be designing lights, but you are also manufacturing lights. So you've kind of got this sort of balance, or you're trying to have this balance between being an artist and being a factory. So there is some sort of friction there, but you also, I think, have similar to myself, you've got sort of that one-man band thing that you also don't mind doing that and doing everything yourself. Where are you at with that process?
Great question. Good observation. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I've always gravitated towards the one-man band thing because I don't like to carry the responsibility of people. I'm a bit of a softy, like I believe in sort of paying people what they're worth, and if I can't do that, I'd rather do it myself, sort of thing. And that's where I've sort of poking around and making lights. How does it work? Like, I look at David Trubridge, he runs a factory with a lot of people. It would be nice to just be the designer. I'd love that. I'd love to just be the designer. Wouldn't that be nice, swanning in and having a chai latte, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Throwing the odd tanty. But
I can't imagine you throwing a tanty or being a diva. I think you're probably one of the least diva-ish people that I've met.
Well, but yeah, I mean, that would be fun to be part of a bigger operation, and because business can be exciting and fun. I'd like that, but I sort of come to the conclusion, cast adrift down here in the bottom of the world, that it's probably going to have to be a small operation, and I think I'll probably at the moment just angle towards the art pieces, and the making part, I guess, is a lot of. You sort of have to do that grind to work out how to make the object better, I think. But having said that, I am sort of maybe outsourcing this light that might be a little more mass market if I can get it to fly. So I'm sort of having a wee dabble in that because I'd love to, travel a bit more and, go to trade shows or something like that. I don't know. I think just doing, one maybe creative observation, seeing this as a podcast on creativity, I always remember in the film industry, there was the people that sort of went on the artistic line in the film industry, and they did it hard, but they stayed the course, and then they got to a point where people really wanted them because they had really refined some specialty or part of it. And then there were a lot of people that were more generalists that maybe had kids and mortgages and wanted more of a normal life. And then so there is that concept of staying the course, if you stay the course with your creativity through all the hard times, you more often than not, I saw people do quite well and achieve.
Well, there's also, I think, there's conflict between or around the topic of scale. So in terms of, would you rather be getting your lights into as many homes as possible, or actually keeping the quantity that you're producing at the level that you are, and just raising the price so people are paying more for them, but you've got the same life that you have currently in terms of your workload and how you're doing things? What would your preference be?
Yeah, nice that you've kept the conversation on course. I think that's where I want to go as the artist's road, or where I am going is price higher